I remember the first time I played Grand Theft Auto 3 as a greasy, pimple-ridden 14-year-old and being absolutely mesmerized by the sheer scope of the world I was in. I hadn't really played anything of this size at this point. Sure, I played JRPGs like Final Fantasy VI with big world maps, but the world map itself wasn't exactly interactive. The interactivity came in the towns and dungeons as well as the overworld battle screens. But in GTA 3, there were people walking around everywhere, cars driving. It felt so full of life. Now back then, this game didn't have as much to do as we see now with GTA 5, but at this time, it blew my fucking mind. But that was 2001, and now in 2023, that feeling of awe has changed quite a lot over the years. What once used to be awe and mesmerization has now turned to mostly indifference, and in some cases downright boredom and disdain. But how do we get from point A to B? Well, there's quite a few reasons for that, but let's start with the biggest reason of all, which is to be taken literally as well, as maps quite frankly are just too big in most games. Take GTA 5 for example, sticking with the Grand Theft Auto train for now. Comparing the sizes from GTA 3 to GTA 5, the map size has increased 10 times over this span. Now I will say GTA 5 for the most part uses a good portion of this map, and I do understand that not everything on the map can be fully fleshed out and interactive, as the real world itself has plenty of stretches where it's just road and not much else. But realistically speaking, you could cut the entire top of the map past the Alamo Sea, and you wouldn't really be missing much, especially when it comes to the online portion of the game. I mean, Mount Chiliad could have easily been made on the southeastern part of the map, Grapeseed could have been combined with Sandy Shores, and Paleto Bay could have been moved and condensed to the western side of the map just above the military base. The point I want to stress is that while sure, these maps may feel more realistic, but from a gameplay perspective, does it positively add to the gaming experience? I'm sure there are folks watching who will say yes, but in my honest opinion, I don't see what the plus side is for an area that's just roads and mountains, apart from the 1 or 2 story missions that use it. Sure, it gives the area a more realistic feel, but after you've gone through the area once, is there any inherent value to going back to it? Are there memorable views there? NPCs worth interacting with? Minigames to play? Like, is there something to do in an area like Mount Gordo in GTA 5? No, it's just empty space. And to me, that's why it's my biggest issue with open world games. The open world itself, apart from about 10 to 20% of the entire map, is generally void of any real interest or value. More often than not, it's a place where you fight your 84th encounter with the same enemy archetype, or you collect your 203rd piece of a consumable that you probably don't use that often anyway, but it's there so you might as well pick it up. I mean, who else is going to use it? There are always exceptions to the rule. Take Minecraft for example. The maps can go on forever, but because the game is designed to be a sandbox where there really isn't any direction apart from building and exploring, you can get away with more dead areas because that becomes a place to mine, a place to build. Whereas a game like Horizon Forbidden West is about you fighting things, so when you're running around a massive map and not fighting anything, what are you really doing? Nothing. Sure, you're moving around, you're collecting things, but the core of the game is fighting giant robot animals and climbing dilapidated buildings searching for knowledge and history. Anything that doesn't fall into the scope of those two things, unless it's a minigame at this point, is downtime. You're not doing anything, you're in a filler episode, only instead of going to the beach and having every female character be one step away from a catastrophic wardrobe malfunction, you're walking around an endless desert picking up sticks. Another thing with open world maps that bother me are the overwhelming amounts of copy-pasted content within them. Assassin's Creed Valhalla has 782 total collectibles to 100% the game. Hogwarts Legacy has 95 Merlin trials in the game, which after about the 4th or 5th trial become completely dull and pointless. And don't get me started on the vista points, radio towers, whatever you want to call the climb something really high and unlock a portion of the map mechanics that most of these games have. What is supposed to be amazing about this type of content? Ooh, look at me, I'm on a really tall cliff, look at this amazing view that matches the same other 17 of these vistas I've already encountered. Maybe if they put a couple unsuspecting saps near the edge of the cliff for me to kick off, there might be something fun to do there. So many open world games are too long as well because of these maps, not because the story is a long emotional roller coaster of a journey, but more often than not, these stories are mostly uninspired drivel with the odd fun moment littered throughout the 30+ hour slog it takes. But because the game has so many distractions, it keeps you from actually engaging with the main storyline, which also lowers your overall enjoyment of it, because you start to forget what was going on after you've finished collecting your 77 bear asses so you can unlock a piece of armor that you won't even wear, because by now you've found a much better piece of armor anyway. And don't get me wrong, I love distractions in these types of games when they're done well. Just take a look at the Yakuza series with all its side stories and minigames. I can get lost for hours playing pool, bowling, darts, classic arcade games, and especially the cabaret minigame from Yakuza 0. But you know what also helps keep things moving in the Yakuza series compared to other games, even with all the distractions? The map doesn't take more than a couple of minutes to walk from one side to the other. It's at this point that I think it's fairly obvious to say that with open world games, developers really need to take a step back and assess what they're building. Maps have become too big, they're devoid of life, and the total game time, unless you're an absolute collectathon aficionado, is becoming too long to the point that there is more than enough time for the player to start losing interest in the game they're supposed to love playing. Horizon Forbidden West was a perfect example of this for me. By about halfway into the story, I finally just gave up on doing anything outside of the main story. There's just too much to do, and most of those things weren't returning anything of intrinsic value back to me. I would really like to see more games do what the Yakuza series does, a much smaller, condensed open world with plenty of people walking around with lots of places to walk into and things to do within them. It's not to say that every game should adopt this, but far too many games are currently falling under the endless wasteland trope of open worlds. I think it would be really cool to play a game where you're set in only a small village town, or a portion of a city that spans what would be maybe a 10-minute or so drive from end to end in real life. It would make maps so much more memorable as you become more and more familiar with the area, rather than the pockets of areas in these bigger maps that you remember, but mostly because of landmarks and key story moments. I also think that the size of maps should be indicative of the type of travel. If your game is set in a period before cars, it should not be massive. If your fastest mode of transportation is a horse, a gigantic map will severely impact how much time the player spends doing nothing. At the very least, if you're in a car, you can crash into other vehicles, run people over, do massive jumps, something that momentarily distracts you from the long distance you're traveling. Forza Horizon 5 is a great example of this, as the high speeds, possible jumps, lots of drifting potential, they all come together and make most longer drives at least somewhat enjoyable, whereas riding a horse down the same long winding path of trees or empty grassy areas doesn't carry the same amount of value. And more unique ways of traversing like Marvel's Spider-Man can also add a lot of value in the more dead areas of the game, as web slinging around New York from beginning to end is a very fun experience all around. At the end of the day, I believe we need to take a step back collectively, both gamers and developers, and reassess what an open world game has to be. In the past decade, we seem to have decided that open world automatically means big, and I don't believe that needs to be the case. And with game budgets increasing because of the scope of these games, the margin for error for these developers is getting smaller and smaller, hence the need for more of these games to incorporate microtransactions, or getting released in buggier and buggier states. As gamers, we need to stop assessing a game's value purely by how long it is, or by how much there is to do in them, because most games nowadays that have the most value by these metrics are actually providing little to no value with that content, because it isn't expertly crafted, it's quickly put together and copy and pasted 100+ times around the entire map. We deserve better, and should be asking for better. If a game wants to have a massive map, that map better be full of interesting things to do, and if it isn't, we shouldn't be supporting that, especially if it's also littered with microtransactions. And the games that do it well, whether big or small, we should be supporting those in droves, so companies look at what these games are doing and copy that, because of course they will do that. Again, I cannot stress enough how well the Yakuza series does open world, at least in my opinion. Sure, they've been reusing the same map of Kamurocho forever, but there's a reason that people have been playing games with the same map for years now. We remember where most things are, we want to go to those places, and it doesn't feel like a slog to get there. There are memories that belong to moments that we remember from these past games, and that map has become a part of that. Okay, fine. I suppose it helps when you're on cloud 9 after just coming out of a karaoke bar where you feel like you just had a 1980s fever dream filled with enough cocaine to overdose a party of blue whales.